So here's something that should change the way you think about pipeline going forward for your business. So according to a company called Six Senses, they did a B2B buyer experience report, and 95% of deals are won by a vendor who has already been on the buyer's shortlist before any sales conversation began. Not 50%, 95%. So by the time a prospect reaches out to you or agrees to take a call with you, they've almost certainly already decided whether you're credible enough to be in that conversation. So the sales process is not where you win the deal, it's where you close it. And that's so important. We always talk about the prospect experience. It's something that we feel is neglected quite a lot. A lot of businesses, they talk about the customer experience. We are very focused on the prospect experience. Like, what is the journey that you're bringing your potential customer on, your prospect, from an online standpoint that gets you the offline meeting? There's a load of businesses that think that, they can just invest in their growth teams for salespeople, but it's actually more investing in pipeline. And that's what we're going to cover today. Because what that means is real competition is happening somewhere most businesses aren't really paying attention to, which is that prospect experience. So there was a period 7 years ago at CSM where we were generating, very decent amount of outbound activity. Meetings were getting booked into our sales team's calendars. Proposals were going out, but the conversation rate on new business felt harder than it should have been. We were doing the right things commercially, but something was slightly off. And we dug into the deals that we were losing, and the patterns started to kind of shine through. In most cases, the client had already begun speaking to 2 or 3 other agencies who they'd found through content, through referrals, or through reputation before we'd ever even entered the picture. So we were being invited into, a competition that we were already behind on. And we hadn't built the brand presence in our business that would have put us on the short list before the buying process even started. So that was the shift, understanding that pipeline isn't just about outreach, it's about being findable and credible and trusted before anyone picks up the phone. And I think that's the key message here, is because most B2B businesses think about pipeline as a sales and marketing execution problem. More outbound, better sequences, higher ad spend, and those things obviously matter, but they're all working to solve a downstream problem. When the upstream problem is who gets considered in the first place, is mostly determined by the brand. So what does your business look like to someone who's never heard of you, but is now trying to decide who to speak to? And what do they find? What do their peers say about you? What proof exists that you're the real thing? And if the answer to those questions is quite thin, then obviously your outbound is fighting uphill every single time and your inbound barely exists. So 2 numbers worth holding onto here is referral leads, people who come back to you through an existing relationship or recommendation, convert at 26% in B2B. So cold outreach converts at 2%. And that's not, that's a very marginal difference there. So there's a big gap there between the two. And separately, 85% of B2B businesses say peer-to-peer recommendations on social proof directly influence their final buying decision. So this means your existing clients, your reputation, and your content are doing more commercial work than most businesses give them credit for or invest in deliberately. So a couple of questions that I think are important to ask yourself is, if a potential client Googled your business today, not your homepage, but your reviews, your case studies, your content, what people say about you, because that's what we believe a brand is. If you're sitting in a boardroom and say all your customers are around that boardroom table and you leave the room for a cup of coffee, what are those customers saying about you? That's what brand is. And it's bringing that brand to your online experience so people can be exposed to all those great reviews, testimonials, and case studies. A reference, an advocate, are you deliberate about that process? Are you deliberate about making sure that you're showcasing the great work that you do for, even if it's a product or a service, it doesn't matter. And what form of pipeline is doing the heavy lifting at the moment? You've got inbound, outbound, and nearbound. Out of those three, what is taking on most of the heavy lifting? Because with all three of those, you create what we call an all-bound strategy. And it's the way we think about building pipeline properly is all-bound architecture. I suppose the premise behind this is quite simple. Brand sits at the top. It's your foundations. It's so important. And underneath brand, you've got three core engines. You've got inbound, outbound, and nearbound. So they each do a different job. They each work at different paces. And the point isn't to run all three simultaneously. Most businesses at, the growth stage, they don't have the resources to do all of these. The point is to be very intentional about which one you're prioritizing and why. Some businesses, in our business, we run all three, and for a lot of our clients, we run all three, but you're sort of at that mark where you're turning over 10 million plus a year is roughly where we start to see companies activate all three of those engines. If you're below that, you might maybe have one or two. So just to give you a rough gauge. So when a buyer is deciding who makes their shortlist, the first thing they do is look for evidence. Have you done this before? For someone that they maybe know, or is within their network, or businesses that they've heard of. And if that evidence doesn't exist or is buried, you don't make the shortlist. So this isn't about having a polished case study PDF. It's about making sure the proof is visible, it's specific, and it's easy to find wherever that buyer is looking. The second brand pillar is market education. So what can your business put into the world, genuinely useful content that is going to help your market? So it could be a podcast, a video series, practical frameworks, honest takes on hard problems within your industry. The businesses that do this consistently aren't just building, SEO value on showing up on search engines, and even now on ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity showing up for search there, because we're now moving away from Google search and YouTube search into AI search, which is another really important category to think about. So are you creating market value through free education is what we always say, like giving away value and not asking for anything in return. Not enough businesses are creating that value and education in their industry. And the third pillar is, that internal transparency, sharing your process, your people, what you actually believe, your values, your North Star, where are you headed? And this is one, again, that I think a lot of businesses skip because it feels uncomfortable or self-indulgent. But buyers aren't just evaluating your capability, they're evaluating where they want to work with you. Do you align from a value standpoint? And what you share about how you think, how you operate, shapes in their decision. And the market, in any market where everyone has polished websites and similar service claims, the businesses that let people see behind the curtain tend to stand out that little bit more. So humanize your brand. Don't hide behind your logo. With brand doing all that foundational work for you, then each pipeline engine, outbound, inbound, and nearbound, they perform differently. So inbound across content, SEO, thought leadership, paid media to drive traffic back to your website. You've got to attract those people who are maybe out there looking on intentional platforms. You've got intentional platforms like Google and SEO because they have an intention. That's why they typed it into a search engine. And then you've got impulse, which would be like platforms like LinkedIn, Meta, where they might come across your ad or your content, and you've intrigued them enough, you've hooked them in enough, you've grabbed their attention to drive them back to the website. So again, the businesses that planted those seeds earlier, they're operating with a fundamentally different cost per acquisition than the ones who didn't. Outbound and direct prospecting, reaching out to companies, targeted campaigns, it generates pipeline for companies that you actively want to work with. It doesn't wait for people to find you, but it's, I suppose, expensive in time and resources. It requires volume to work. and a lot of calls that and a longer sales cycle because they didn't have this intention before you reached out to them. So a longer sales cycle, especially if you're dealing with buying committees, and you could be sending out dozens of outreach attempts every single week. The signal to noise problem is definitely real there. So outbound is most effective when brand has already done some work, and then your SDRs are leveraging those signals to then reach out to those companies. Finally, nearbound is, again, what we feel a lot of companies just aren't investing in, forming those strategic partnerships. It's very vast, although different ways in which you can form nearbound partnerships. So your existing clients, your network, your partners, the people who already trust you and have seen your work firsthand, this is your highest converting pipeline source by a significant margin, because I suppose it mostly runs on goodwill and luck rather than deliberate systems. So building a nearbound deliberately means having a process for asking for referrals at the right moment, for keeping warm relationships active without it feeling transactional. So before you think about which engine to build for your business, I would highly recommend you do a brand audit, do a competitor analysis on your competitors' brands, and really make sure that you're working on your positioning, your messaging, not just your visual identity, but your commercial presence, your search your business name on Google. I want you to, see what keywords are linked back to your business. Like, really make sure that you are doing a full analysis and you're using case studies and bringing stories to the forefront of your digital presence as well. This is so, so important. So the businesses that will be hardest to compete with 3 years from now are the ones that have invested in brand and then have really been intentional about which engines are going to drive traffic back towards that home base, which is your website, your funnel, and are really intentional about that prospect experience. So I hope this is helpful. As a quick recap, brand sits at the top, and then you've got inbound, outbound, and nearbound, which creates an all-bound strategy to facilitate you in growing the business, because a business lives and dies based on its pipeline.